share those with us. But we understand that there are two presentations, that one would be on state ownership of the media and some of the views on that. We know there's been some debate back and forth about that, so we will invite you. I understand you will make that presentation, the Director General.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Chairman. And we, from the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, are particularly happy to be given this opportunity to share our views. Basically, the position of GBC is that we have had specific mention in the Constitution and subsequent Supreme Court interpretations of what the state-owned media means and what it should do. And there were certain expectations or certain assumptions that it will be in a particular form. So what this short presentation is simply to do is to present to you our experience in the last 3 decades, since whether we will be able to survive the next 3 decades based on what the Constitution has provided. And some of it is that our position is that the Constitution of them haven't been properly as expected. So quickly presented to you is a quick introduction and a justification for public service media. Now, when you look into the Constitution, the state-owned media, please go back too fast. The state-owned media had the expectation that the National Media Commission will insulate the state-owned media from governmental control, specifically Article 167C, that specifically says that it has the duty to insulate the state-owned media. And so subsequent Supreme Court rulings has meant that the NMC has to appoint the CEO and the board of these organizations. Now, after 3 decades, what have we experienced? And what must we ensure that these important institutions of democracy will survive for the next 3 decades? The point to make, and the reason why the Constitution was specific about state-owned media, presumably, was the expectation that of all the media systems we have, it is only the public service media that has the mandate to ensure universality of access and diversity of content. No other media system has that mandate. And it was for this reason that the Constitution was specific by putting a certain amount of burden of responsibility on the state-owned media. And it was expected because if you look at across the world, from the United States to the United Kingdom, the European Union member states, Canada, Australia, Japan, and South Africa are just a few examples. But what we can say is this: throughout the world, all serious nation states have maintained a publicly funded public service system. And our example is the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. But the basic idea is that it is not to be seen to go out there to do advertising to generate revenue, but it is to be seen to ensure that Ghanaians everywhere, which has to do with the universality of access concept and the diversity of content, Ghanaians everywhere must be given content whether there is advertising revenue or not. And that is why across the world, the type of GBC is always in there. But the character given to GBC in the Constitution is the problem. Next slide, please. So, for example, when you go to Article 55:11, the state shall provide fair opportunity to all political parties to present their program to the public by ensuring equal access to the state-owned media. The Supreme Court judgment on MPP versus GBC has interpreted this to mean equal airtime to all political parties. There was no provision for how the resources will be provided to ensure equal access. So GBC over the years has expected that the government will resource it to deliver. And we have seen a consistent refusal of government not to resource GBC to deliver on this particular mandate. And so the Constitution has properly insulated GBC from governmental control, but accidentally, it has also insulated GBC from the resource allocative power of the state. So our submission is that we must find a cure for the resource allocation for GBC. And I will show you further evidence to show that the last 25 years has seen a very sorry story of consistent denial of resources. It doesn't matter which party is in power. The assumption is that if they resource you to give equal airtime to all political parties, they are invariably giving resources to the other parties to contest. So any government in power finds it prudent not to, in their own selfish interest, to resource GBC. So that is exactly why over the years, in the last 25 years, consistently, GBC has had issues of equipment. So our point we are making is that the insulation from governmental control as contained in 167C has resulted in governments consistently not resourcing GBC to deliver on this mandate. It's a very fantastic clause, but it has a weakness that has to be cured. And we think that this committee should look into that from the resource allocation power of the state. Next. So we are saying that there's something missing in the Constitution, that to protect state-owned media from resource starvation. Two, for example, in the last 11 years, 700 staff of GBC have retired, resigned, or died, and have not been replaced. This is consistent, deliberate attempt to create a number projection at management is that GBC, if this trend continues in the next 5 years, it will not be sustainable. The human resource levels will not be able. Most of our resources are into rural radio broadcasting. We maintain 18 FM stations, broadcasting in 27 Ghanaian languages across the country. And that is where most of the work of GBC is. Not GTV or GBC News. No, the real work of GBC is in rural and across the board, FM station broadcast, radio broadcast. That's where we put most of our resources. Now, in the last, please back, in the last 25 years, we have had no capital expenditure on GBC. So, for example, every good national broadcaster must have an OB from the private sector at $15,000 a day if we must broadcast live broadcast for international audience. Across Africa, all public service broadcasters are given new OB vans by their government. GBC, the last OB van we have has a registration number, numbering our cars with 2009 up to 25. So we think that the infrastructure deficit is set to collapse the organization until the cure is found. Next slide, please. It's put in Article 5511. That denial simply translates to mean that when it is time for election, we give very minimal airtime to meet our constitutional obligation and reserve a chunk of the airtime for the political parties that can buy. I don't want any lawyer to tell me that I'm breaking the Constitution, but what I'll tell you is that I have electricity bills to pay, I have fuel to buy into vehicles to run. So to raise the money, we sell the airtime, and this is not really right. It has to be core parties. We'll grant as the Constitution has instructed. So we are saying, and we are putting before this committee, that there are two options. There are two options opened for your consideration. And one is to provide resource guarantees for GBC to ensure that it survives the next 3 decades. The second option we are putting before you is to say that GBC be properly set up as a public service broadcasting system. As a public service broadcasting system which must be in the form as BBC, where their resources is not at the whim of government of the day. We must choose one of these options to pursue. Yes, next slide. So if we go for, and we have, Chairman, we have a set of 5 recommendations covering these 2 options. If we were to keep the state-owned media in its current form, we are requesting that we must provide a cure for the denial of resources. Next. 2, that if we keep the form as it is, that it should be state-owned media in its current form, then we are also requesting that we need a clear definition of what constitutes state-owned media. Mr. Chairman, there is a certain coincidence, I will call it. It might not be intended. At a time where certain state institutions are using public funds to set up TV stations, like the police TV, having better equipment than GBC, the question we put before the committee is to tell us, does the police TV qualify as state-owned media? In which case, it should be properly located within the National Media Commission. As we speak, it is not. Now, the definition of state-owned media has to be properly defined so that police TV, and we are expecting to see Fire TV and other state agencies are all clamoring to have TV stations. Should they have, which we are not begrudging them, but we are saying that we need a clear definition of what constitutes state. Because if they are also state organizations and they are resourced to run TV stations, and we are denied the same state resources, then there must be a very canny and very interesting coincidence, which we are not able to tell exactly what is happening. But we think we should bring it to the table. We need a clear definition of what constitutes state-owned media. 3, should we go with the second option, which is GBC should be properly set up as a truly public service broadcasting organization? We are saying that there are global best practices which we can refer to, which we are requesting that let us go ahead and roll it out as a proper public service broadcasting system. And the BBC example is there for us to learn from. And we are also saying that in whichever form you take, whether we are going with the state-owned broadcasting or we are going with the public service broadcasting, there must be a clear compulsion on the state. In its original form, did not mention GBC. It said the state. And a subsequent interpretation has meant the state means the state-owned program, like GBC. Fine, we are happy to take up that responsibility, but we say that there must be a clear compulsion on the state to fund GBC to do election-related coverage. And the last, Mr. Chairman, is to say that when this constitution was passed, and for most of the 32, 3 years we have experienced, GBC was tax exempt. In recent years, GBC has been told that we are no more tax exempt. And last year, we ordered 4 transmitters to do public service broadcasting. And these transmitters are deployed at Wa, Bolga, Kumasi, and Accra. And we were told to pay duty to customs. And BBC to pay such a tax to do public service broadcasting is punitive. And we think that something should be done about it. Because for most of the period that this constitution has been enforced, GBC has been tax exempt. And I think the last 3 or 4 years, they have imposed tax this on us. So, Chairman, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to present this. And a formal comprehensive paper will be submitted to the committee. This is just to bring this up for discussion. And thank you very much for the audience.
Thank you very much, DG. This is one of the things that we have learned from this process is how very little progress we could have made on our own had we not gone the way that we have, which is engage different constituencies, different stakeholder groups, different parts of our community to understand their peculiar issues and their peculiar way that we would have gotten any of this kind of invited you here, and if you are not accepted our invitation to come here today. So thank you very, very much. This has been quite insightful, and yes, we actually encourage written submissions from the participants who come before us to share the ideas with us. So we will hold you to your promise, and we also invite similar submissions from all of you here. Could be individual submissions, could be institutional, but definitely do use our channel, Constitution, submissions at constitutionreviewgh.org. And you should be able to talk to our staff and project coordinator here about sending the submission. So thank you very much. This has been exceedingly helpful. I understand there's a second presentation. It's some questions have some questions for the presenters, and then we will open it up for conversation with the general audience here. And be reminded that this is also being live streamed, so we have a public audience as well.
Thank you, Prof. Chair. Okay, yes, Prof. Chair. A small media coalition was put together just to solicit, and so we gathered some information from the media fraternity, and we have put that together, and we would also be making a very elaborate submission. But this brief presentation is just to highlight some of the key issues that have been extensively elaborated in the submission and some of the recommendations that we've made. But I have almost all my colleagues here, and they would be intermittently coming in when you pose the question. I hear you said you have questions for the presenters, but those questions would be answered by almost all our colleagues here, because we've all made a few inputs here. Okay, next slide, please. So our presentation is just going to look at the current state of media freedom. Next. And we do recognize the importance of media freedom and independence. And I think observing the presentations that have been made, even when you look at others who came around, everybody realized that the media is very important, because media freedom and independence are essential pillars of our democracy. They promote accountability, transparency, public discourse. And we all know that a free and independent media ensures that our citizens are informed, and it enables them to make informed decisions. And we know that those things go by and large to affect almost every aspect of our society. Next slide, please. What is the current state of media freedom in Ghana? Ghana's constitution guarantees freedom of expression and the right to information, and then media freedom and independence. And Prof. Chair, you indicated that a whole chapter has been dedicated to media freedom and independence in Ghana, and that's very unique. And it goes to show the importance of the media in our democratic architecture. And just to highlight a few of those provisions, Chapter 5, Article 21 of the 1992 Constitution, there are a number of provisions there that talks about all persons shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression, which shall include freedom of the press and other media. And it's very crucial, because at the time that the framers of the Constitution put together the Constitution, the media landscape hasn't taken this sort of outlook. And now you have all sorts of actors who are almost playing the role that the traditional media plays. And what role do you give them? How do you recognize them? Do they come under the safeguards that the traditional media come under? These are all things that, constitutional review would have to take into account to deal with those situations. Next slide, please. Freedom and independence of the media is guaranteed in Chapter 12 of the 1992 Constitution, and some of the key highlights: 162, freedom and responsibility of the media. Next slide. But as practitioners and also citizens of Ghana, we hear that all the time. What are you saying that the media should be allowed to churn out all sorts of ideas, no matter how false, alarming, and dangerous they are, irrespective of what it is? Certainly not. That is not what the Media Coalition is saying. We recognize that, no, you cannot allow the media to just churn out everything they want to churn out under the guise of freedom of expression, media freedom. Yes, next slide. Because the Constitution itself recognizes that freedom is not absolute. And it's not only media freedom, but you would struggle to find any freedom in any democratic institution or any democratic country where freedom is absolute. There would always be some sort of qualifications. And Chapter 12, Article 164, does talk about the provisions of Article 162 and 163 of this Constitution are subject to laws that are reasonably required in the interest of national security, public order, public morality, and for the purpose of protecting the reputations, rights, and freedoms of other persons. And then it goes ahead in Chapter 12 again, Article 165, to talk about the fact that for the avoidance of doubt, the provisions of this chapter shall not be taken to limit the enjoyment of any of the fundamental human rights and freedoms guaranteed under Chapter 5 of this Constitution. And what is in Chapter 5? That is where almost all the fundamental human rights that have been guaranteed by the Constitution can be found. So there again, it's reminding us that, yes, in exercising your right as a media, you should be mindful of the fact that some other people have been guaranteed or given rights under Chapter 5, so you should be mindful of how you use that. So that also demonstrates to us that, yes, freedom is not absolute and that it is qualified. Vague and broad provisions of some of the articles in the constitutions that indirectly leads to some interpretations or some actions that interfere with the very concept of freedom and independence of the media. Yes, next slide. And just to tease out some of these examples that we talked about, Article 21.1, all persons shall have a right to. And then when you look at F, it says information subject to such qualifications and laws as are necessary in a democratic society. And this issue about subject to qualifications and laws as are necessary, the word necessary itself, all sorts of interpretations have been given to it, and it has led to all sorts of things that we would see in the preceding slides. 2 says, a restriction on a person's freedom of movement by his lawful detention shall not be held to be inconsistent with or in contravention of this article. Yes, next slide. For the imposition of restrictions that are reasonably required in the interest of defense, public safety, public health, or the running of essential services. There again, we see the use of the word reasonably required, and we see the use of public safety, public health coming in again. And then when you look at E, the word reasonably comes in again, says reasonably required for the purpose of safeguarding the people of Ghana against the teaching or propagation of a doctrine which exhibits or encourages disrespect for the nationhood of Ghana and national symbols and emblems, or incites hatred against other members of the community, except so far as those provisions or case may be, the thing done under the authority of the law is shown not to be reasonably justifiable in terms of the spirit of this Constitution. So we see this word again coming up quite often in those provisions. Next slide, please. Article 164, there again we see the word reasonably, national security, public order, public morality, and then for the purpose of protecting the reputations, rights, and freedom of other persons. I've talked about 165 already in in the previous slides. So next slides. The consequences of such provisions is the justification of its use. So because of some of these provisions and the broad and vague way they have actually been couched in the Constitution, we see that Section 208(1) that talks about when a person publishes or reproduces a statement, rumor, or report which is likely to cause fear and alarm to the public or to disturb the public peace, knowing or having reason to believe that the statement, rumor, or report is false. National, independence, we repeal the criminal libel. But for some reason, this provision is still in our book. And anytime this issue comes up and the media complains about it, we are taken back to the fact that, mind you, the Constitution itself has indicated that your freedom is not absolute, it is qualified. And these are one of the qualifications where we think we can throw in to deal with those sort of concerns that the framers of the Constitution had. Next slide, please. We have, now, if you go back, this provision, please go back one slide. The 1960 Act, when people raise this issue and say it is almost indirectly or another criminal libel in another form, they say, well, maybe when they repealed the criminal libel, they forgot about this provision. That's why it was not repealed. But then you go to the next slide, which was quite recent, 208, and you look at the provisions in Section 76(1) of the Electronic Communications Act of 208, it has almost a similar language and trying to achieve the same purpose as the 1960 Act. So it wasn't really an inadvertent provision. It was just left there for a purpose. But the purpose for which it was left there, the media by and large has suffered and continue to suffer based on these provisions. Next slide, please. Section 76(2) also talks about that same concerns that we have. Next slide, please. And false publications, is it at variance with international standards? These provisions, they are actually provisions that are in variance with international standards when you talk about the concept of freedom of the media and independence. The Kenyan have to raise concerns about some of these provisions. Next slide, please. Fundamental human rights. This is frequently relied upon as a reason for justifying the interference with media freedom and independence, using these provisions in our statute because they say the Constitution has made provisions that your freedom is not absolute, is qualified, and it can be interfered with if it's in the public interest to do so, and all those things. And there is this particular concern that has been raised about the use of an amorphous concept of national security to justify invasive limitations on the enjoyment of human rights. It's a serious concern because, as we said, the concept is broad, really defined, and is vulnerable to manipulation by states as a means of justifying accuracy around investigations or law enforcement activities, thereby undermining the very principles of transparency and accountability which the media almost always seeks to promote. Next slide, please. So these are the proposed constitutional amendments which has been extensively touched on in our submission that we'll be sending. We are putting those protections. We need to be very clear-cut in terms of some of the definitions so that we cure the broadness and vagueness in the constitutional provisions, enhance media independence, establish clear and transparent guidelines for media regulations, and then promote transparency in media ownership. Next slide, please. And some of the recommendations that we are also making is that we'll see increasingly that the media has been in the forefront when it comes to exposing by just the mainstream media. By and large, it is done by going out of the normal media reportage. And investigative journalism is one of the tools that are used to do that. But investigative journalism is a very expensive, if you like, a venture. And so by and large, a lot of media houses are staying away from that. And so what happens is that you see that those media houses that are doing that under extreme financial constraints, or they get funding from external sources. We are saying to deal with that situation, we should consider establishing an investigative journalism fund, so that fund, and we have provided an extensive, framework of how that fund can be put in place, how they can be managed, the composition of those who can actually be managing that fund. And we are talking about this whole limitations on freedom of expression and media freedom. We should go back and evaluate the way those limitations are done. Are they done in a way to, if you like, achieve a legitimate aim? Because by and large, we realize that when those provisions under the constitutions are used to try and interfere with media freedom and to achieve sometimes political interest, parochial interest, but because they are so vague, people rely on that to perpetuate this sort of interference against the media. And sometimes what we realize is that even when they are used to achieve a legitimate aim, they are very disproportionate. So you look at the provisions we talked about, Section 208, that has been used largely against the media. Person, because they said he or she has published something that has the tendency to cause fear and panic, he gets arrested or she gets arrested, she's taken to the police station, he or she is denied bail, and then after you go in there, after 2 days, they release the person, and nothing happens. But that case is still pending. Just to warn you that in case anytime, you do something that they are not comfortable about, they remind you, hey, case be and we say of providing very clear-cut guidelines and regulations to deal with that. And ensuring parliamentary approval, and I think Prof has mentioned that when it comes to the state-owned media, we are saying that looking at the role the state-owned media is playing, we're saying that their budgets, the way the budgets now is dealt with, I think it's dealt with through the ministry. We are saying that why can't their budget be dealt with like some of the statutory, organizations or institutions where they may directly go to parliament and get their budgets, approved, so that sort of, formula where they have to go through the ministry, and we know that sometimes it has been used to that we know that there is please go back a bit. The broadcasting bill has been in the pipeline for so many years, and nothing seems to be done about it. We hear that there is some attempt to make it happen, but we are saying that if we are going to push for this to be done, maybe we should have a provision in the Constitution where we give timelines, say that after the amendment has been done, maybe within this period of time, the broadcasting bill should come into effect. That way, you make it very difficult for anybody to continue to extend or prolong the passage of the broadcasting bill. Yes, please. In conclusion, we are arguing that a vibrant and independent media is crucial for Ghana's democratic growth. Implementing these recommendations and proposed constitutional amendments will strengthen our media landscape, promote diverse narratives, and ensure that journalists, media professionals, and houses can operate without fear and positive growth. This would lead, we would also be strengthening other institutions that rely on the media to keep the limelight on the way they do things. So thank you very much, Prof. Chair, and we would be available to answer any further questions that you may pose. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think the two presentations has given us more than enough to start a conversation focused on the media. I will invite the members of the committee who have questions for both presenters or either of them to take their turn, and then after that we'll open up the conversation to the audience. Prof. Amin, and Mr. Tanko. I want to ask just a couple of questions for your consideration. See, the presentations you have made are essentially for the media industry, legislation, laws, and the media rights have some concerns for the general public. The point I'm trying to make is that you've spoken very well, eloquently about the ailments of the industry, the media industry. But it seems to me that you haven't addressed what would be the concern of the general public that you serve. And that's very, very important because, and I'm sure most of us here will acknowledge the fact that for the average Ghanaian, their concerns today about the media are the professional and ethical standards that bother them all the time. And you know what I mean. So much of our broadcasting space, so much of our social media space, so much even of large sections of our print space are worrisome. They don't really add much value to the democracy that we are talking about. It's unethical, unprofessional, and so on. How do we address that? We do know that ideally, the best way to address that is self-regulation. But I do know from experience also that GIBA, for instance, has been very loath to even contemplate the idea of self-regulation. When the Ghana Journalists Association tried with setting up an ethics committee, all the editors and others boycotted it, so it collapsed. Where we are now, to convince so many politicians, so many of the public to have sympathy with you. Take, for instance, this problem that arises where some traditional authorities arbitrarily close down radio stations because, according to them, somebody has insulted the traditional authority or somebody has committed some sacrilege on air and so on. Invariably, in all of these instances, the community support their traditional authorities because they consider that the media concerned have been unethical or unprofessional, or mujidiatem, and so on. So, yes, the Constitution must give you the rights, but the rights are not absolute. The absoluteness or non-absoluteness character of the media is what you deliver to the public. So what must we do to also improve media standards whilst also pursuing the rights of the media? That's, for me, very, very important. The limitations that Mr. Tanko talked about are largely derived from the ICC PR, the International Covenant, and so on and so forth. And many governments repeat these and so on, and of course use them for various purposes. But again, how do we cure that problem when professional standards are such a problem in the country today? It will be very difficult to convince the people who must endorse those proposals, looking at the situation that we find ourselves in. So there must be some give and take. Unless the media are prepared to regulate themselves properly, there are many politicians who are going to say, no, no, no. If we do this, look at the situation as it is. So I come back to that question of self-regulation or statutory regulation. How do we strengthen the National Media Commission to ensure and enforce ethical and professional standards? I think we must consider those. Mr. Chairman, my last point goes to Professor Amin and the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation.
One, in your own view, what is your own perspective? You raised two issues concerning this media. What is your preference and why? Second, when it comes to the financial sustainability of GEC, every government will tell you that we don't have money. That's always, and then you will be seen. But also, I think somewhere in the recesses of the minds of people in government, they look at you as part of the broad broadcasting landscape. If this media are doing well, why should you come to us? This is the mindset that has blocked the implementation of the TV license payment, even though it is sanctioned by law. So how do we respond to the authorities on these matters? Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you very much. And picking up from where Prof. Kakari has left off, regarding the financing of GBC, in your presentation, you gave us examples of countries where the state is funding, public service media, etc., UK, etc., etc. But, currently we're seeing that even in the UK, even in the US, questions are increasingly being raised. And even in the US, they've gone as far as, trying to legislate, that. So in the light of that, what do you think, should be done? Because we can't just take the examples of those countries where even they are retreating from what they used to do. What is the sustainable way or mechanism to fund GBC or public radio media in the light of this? And also to tie to that, what percentage of your budget is coming from, internally generated funds, and what is coming from the state? And I'm asking this on the basis that our assumption that it could be possible to say this percentage of your services are kind of like, what do we call it? Not really operational, but in a public interest broadcasting. And so that percentage should be funded through the state. And then this other percentage is maybe more, a bit commercially oriented and etc. So that, again, we see how to deal with that. And a broader question around the digital and online media. Questions have been raised, people have raised issues, and whenever these things come up, then the response is regulation, tighter regulation, etc. So what do you think, how do we protect digital and online media rights while, taking cognizance of all these issues that have been raised and, and the challenges? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have two questions. One for, I think it's on here. It's on. One for Professor Amin and one for Mr. Zakaria Tanko. For Prof. Amin, you mentioned BBC as a model of funding when it comes to the public service media. I want to know from you exactly what do you want us to direct our attention to in the funding of the BBC? That's one. And then with respect to our good friend Zakaria Tanko, in your presentation, I get a sense that you are not very comfortable with phrases such as necessary in a democratic society. You're not happy with reasonably required because you say they are nebulous, they are vague. And I want to find out from you, are you suggesting to us that we should take those words out? And if so, what do we replace them with? Considering that these words have been provided in the Constitution to strike a delicate balance between the freedom of speech, the right to broadcast, and also the protection of other rights. So how do we strike this balance? Because as you've rightly stated, no right is absolute, and therefore there is need for the striking of good balance. How do you achieve that if we are to take out these moderating phrases, we call them. I thank you.
I'm following up from what my three colleagues have said. I hope in your papers that you present to us, you add a definition of state-owned media and public service body for us to work on. So that I want it to come from you, from your own perspective, and then we'll build upon that. And what about the idea of making the media a constitutional body? Yes, a constitutional body, so that to be fully protected, so that the tenure of office of the directors and everybody to be protected. What about that? So if you haven't thought about it, think about it. And then my question to the second presenter, he was concerned about publication of false information not being a criminal offense. If it is not a criminal offense, then what, in your opinion, should it be? Because if it is be civil, then it means that a lot of journalists will end up before the court for libel and slander and the rest. So what is the proposal or the midway to protect press freedom and pressmen in general, the media in general?
Thank you for those two excellent presentations. So my first question to Prof. You talk about the state-owned media, or at least GBC, having these dual public interest mandates that's peculiar to state-owned media, universality of access, and the diversity, of content kind of enterprise. But of course, there is also a commercial angle to your work, and these two prevent you from face that kind of duality of mandates, be commercial, be profitable, but you do have public interest mandates added onto your task. And I think that's basically a dilemma of all state enterprises. In the current environment in which we operate, with IGF becoming, every state institution is doing internally generated funds, basically raising money commercially or in some other way. Explain exactly what disables the state-owned media from, making money in the current space in which we are. Of course, there's competition from private media. You are losing market share. Your monopoly is gone. But that is the environment in which we are. And some are competing in that same space and thriving. So what exactly, notwithstanding these two public interest mandates, or maybe that's what's not making you able to survive. Then the second one is, explain a little better for me how this inability to replace staff you're losing, why is GBC unable to replenish staffing? I wasn't quite sure exactly what is causing that. And then this having to go to the minister for the budget. I understand, I think you really did, you explained very well how insulation from government control, on the other, has a flip side, which is that it also makes it difficult for the government to open its purse and give you money. But why isn't the NMC doing that instead of you? Why must you go to the minister to get money? Isn't it part of the NMC's job? If it's insulating you from from governmental control, I would have thought that part of its job in terms of insulation is to actually take it upon itself, as opposed to the organization or the GBC itself going to a minister to plead its case for money. Why isn't the NMC, what's the role of the NMC in your funding situation? And which brings me to the NMC itself and how it's exercising its mandate. And this also goes to, I think, the second presentation by Mr. Tanko Musa. The NMC issue about content regulation has come up. Clearly, there's of course a Supreme Court case on this matter. Article 178, also 173, sorry, also does seem to appear to have language there that limits the ability of the NMC to push forward with some of the issues that Professor Kakari has laid bare on the table. And this is really, I think, the elephant in the room, is that there's not that many Ghanaians now are sympathetic to the issue of media freedom. We've had Afrobarometer data, it seems somewhat corrected, but at some point, there were actually more Ghanaians than fewer who were supporting serious control of the media because of abuse of freedom, right? When we first found that data in our survey, we were a bit alarmed that all of a sudden Ghanaians are becoming almost hostile to media. So, but that is really at the crux of the issue, that there are a lot of people who think that the problem with the media today is not one of a lack of freedom, but an excess of it. And that the space has become a Wild West, unregulated, anything goes, people just say whatever they want, abusive language, some language bordering on obscenity, pornography, just all manner of things, right? So there's a lot of conversation around content regulation. And yet one has to, of course, strike this balance. What would you propose in terms of the role of the NMC? It has come up for discussion. Do we take another look at its functions, its powers? What must we do to enable the NMC to do a more effective job of regulating the media space, possibly sanitizing it, without tipping the balance against freedom? And I think that is the dilemma that a lot of us face. Issues have also come up about the NCA versus NMC issue. One is supposed to be a technical regulator or issuer of whatever it is that the NCA is supposed to do. I'm not too sure. I understand the work very well. But there seems to be a tension between these two state bodies in terms of the regulation of the media space. And because one gives what it is that you need to operate, I think over time it has more or less accreted more power over the media, because you do need their license to operate, or more or less their technical permission to operate. So it has unbalanced this relationship. One is in the constitution, but the other appears to have more power. And how might we deal? Well, I think Musa mentioned it a bit, touched on the issue of ownership, which has also come up, and the extent that it appears to have gone, and how that affects issues of polarization, issues of social cohesion, and some of these other issues. Maybe any one of you could actually reflect on that, and if there are possible ways in which we can help, because part of the goal of this exercise as we see it is to improve our democracy, to improve our governance, help with social cohesion, to be to be informed by as we make our recommendations. Everything we do must help to improve the workings of the democracy, must help to improve governance, promote better accountability, help social cohesion and the country's development. So these are some of the issues that I would want you to, both of you, to help us answer. And then the last would be social media, AI, technology. You know, how is it affecting all of this? I mean, I thought one of the things that Professor Amin was going to tell us that the technological assumptions underlying the Constitution, when it had those provisions about state-owned media, no longer make any sense, and that you are even at risk of disappearing because of technology. Of course, you have indicated that there's a risk of that happening, but not coming from technology. You know, exactly how is technology playing in your space, and what is it that can be done, if anything at all, to deal with this issue? So our online members have a question, have sent some questions. So Dr. Esi Ansa has, funding. Great. So what percentage of GBC's budget comes from IGF versus what you expect from government? You know, so really the same, more or less the same issue that I was asking about IGF. Thank you.
So one quick question. In parts of the Constitution where a representative body is needed, you know, for in some of the provisions, you know, the name like maybe GBA, Ghana Bar Association, etc. Should that be the case for GJA, that we see it as a representative body of journalists and that it can, you know, be mentioned in the Constitution where they are referring to representative bodies? Yeah, is there. But what I'm asking is that still specify, but just say maybe a representative body of engineers or a representative body of journalists, etc. So I would like maybe your take on that when we come. Thank you.
So you know, under Article 166, I mean, to go back to Mr. Alhaji Tanko's point. So it's interesting that when we're looking at the composition of the GJA, of the named specifically, right? Except when it comes to the training institutions of journalists and communicators, right? So 15 members, one representative each nominated by, and their Ghana Bar Association is named, the NAT is named, Ghana Advertising, and of course the thinking is that these are not constitutional or state bodies, so you don't name them in the Constitution. You just find a way to describe them. Say, you know, the association representing lawyers or whatever, recognized in the country or something, the association representing advertisers or whatever, but that's what we have, right? They are named. And it's interesting that it doesn't, I mean, then it has two representatives nominated by GJA. It's also there. And I think the question is, should we begin to take out specific mentions of that kind and rather describe them generically so that it doesn't appear that we are constitutionalizing the GJA, the Bar Association? These are not constitutionally created. So why do we name them in the... It's a task, I guess, for us, the drafters, or, you know, it's a tough task to redo these things this way because it's all over the place and it's been done already. You know, other constitutions, more modern constitutions coming up, don't do it that way. The Kenyan Constitution doesn't name any private or non-state body in the Constitution. It describes them, and you know exactly what they are talking about, but they are not named. It may be too late for us to correct some of these things, but I think that is what the dilemma that Alhaji Tanko is posing for more like the drafting. How do we clean up these kinds of specific mentions of non-state bodies in a constitution or private bodies in a constitution?
Professor Kakari raised about the concerns of the general public vis-a-vis all the issues. And I think that sometimes when it comes to GBC, I want to tell you that the concerns of the general public affected are never heard. Before the coming into force of this constitution, and before the digital era, GBC covered Ghana more than it is doing today. If you drive on the margins of this country, from Chereponi to Bolko to Paga to Osei Kojokro, what will strike you is the fact that along all these border district capitals, the signals you will hear in your car radio are either Togolese or Ivorian or Burkina Faso. Today, as we speak, it was not so. It was not so because GBC was given the resources to operate 48 locations across the country to ensure that radio signals are strong enough. They have no media. The last one I remember was Chereponi, when they were fighting, and we were pleading on them to stop. They were not even hearing any Ghanaian radio station or TV telling them. Because if you go to Chereponi, the only radio you listen to is Togo FM. Now, VOA is not a public service broadcaster. VOA is a department of the Foreign Service, American Foreign Service. It's used as an instrument of soft power. Rather, it is the Corporation for Public Broadcasting in the US, which receives federal funds to fund about 1,000 public service broadcasting systems across the United States. So when we talk about the VOA, it is not counted. It is simply an instrument of soft power for American Foreign Service. And even until the internet era, VOA was forbidden from broadcasting to Americans. If you are American, you could only listen to VOA when you travel outside, because it was forbidden. Now, the true public service broadcasting in the United States are those funded, who receive funds from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And that is what Trump tried to, and he was reminded that they are determined by law. They are not like VOA. They are separate. And so funding public service broadcasting has never been more important than now. Now, I will say this. If America and Britain mean that where we are in Ghana today, we should be listening to them, we need to also fund, at least for the next 50 years, to make sure that media access is democratized, civil culture is developed to the extent that we can now say that we have also arrived, and let us discontinue it. For now, we cannot learn from them. We must learn from their history, not their current practice. So they can go ahead and discontinue it, but we need to remember that we need at least 50 years of funding public service media to get there. So what I want to point out, and I've done this myself, as Director General of GBC, I have deliberately driven, it has been a very rigorous travel. I got sick through that. Traveled throughout the margins and came back. And I was alarmed at one consistent store, Burkina, to pay for funeral announcements. In fact, that is why last year we had to replace our transmitter in Wa. Thankfully, today as we speak, our signals go beyond Upper West, and it hits into Burkina Faso too. Bolga had the same experience. We got a transmitter last year to do just that, to ensure that when it comes to signals, we should also go across the border so that no Ghanaian can say that I can't hear Ghana radio or Radio Ghana. We've passed that, and this is the point we're saying, that the concern they have, we are not even capable of hearing them. The only time we hear is when they take guns and knives to resolve their differences. That is when we will know that they are Ghanaians. So the point I'm making is that the concerns about the public is the fact that we are not even capable of learning them about them, but we have the story to tell because of what we do. Now, the question was asked, what are my preferences? We put together two options. Frankly, statecraft is a very funny system. If I made a politician today, I will do everything to have my way. So state-owned media is not the way to go, in my view. A truly public service broadcasting setup where state officials have no business talking to. Anytime you ask that the state has the capacity to give resources to an institution, it goes with certain leverage. And that we can cure by simply going for a truly public service broadcast. Now, there are models. Now, the British people started a TV license at the time when TV was the most popular electronic gadget. Now, they are stuck with a heritage. When the Finns learned public service media tax, 1% of every adult Finn's annual income is devoted to fund the YLE. YLE is the equivalent of BBC in Finland, or GBC in Finland. And YLE today is not allowed to do commercial broadcasting. They are one of the best, strongest public service systems in Europe. And their model is simply 100% funded by the state, by public funds, location, which is simply defined as 1% of the income of every adult. And that is working. The BBC model is suffering because people sometimes say that, okay, why should I pay TV license? I don't even watch you. And I say, no, no. You are not paying TV license to watch GBC. Whilst you are in Accra enjoying more than 100 TV channels, your compatriots across the country in the fringes and in the hinterland are not good media market to attract the private media. GBC has the responsibility to get them on board so that you don't have to budget for a military intervention to go and fight. And you see, it's a very funny coincidence. I'll tell you this. Boko conflict, GBC had just finished setting up an FM studio to start broadcasting. They literally funded GBC outlet, ensuring that only proper public information is given out to control abuse of radio or any other form of listening. And I can tell you that in the last 3 years, we put up an FM station at Yendi, exclusively GBC FM station. About 2 years ago, there was a near outbreak of conflict. But thankfully, the MCE, and it was a conflict between the governments, they gathered the two sides into the studio, and they gave out the true story that what they were seeing on social media was lies. And that, now, a radio station is very important to prevent any conflict situation. So that the question is, how do you justify funding GBC when the private media is doing its work? And I have a simple question. Name me one private media in Ghana that is broadcasting in more than 5 Ghanaian languages. We are doing 27. And we are telling you that it's not enough because we have more than 50 Ghanaian languages that are out there. How does it feel to grow up in a community as a Ghanaian, and the only radio station and TV station you have is somebody's language? They are Ghanaian languages, but it is not your language. And you are growing up, your sense of belongingness. So the concept of universality of access and diversity of content is foregrounded to say that public service broadcasters can never run away from that responsibility. We have done 27. We still have a long way to go, but there must be an understanding that the right to listen to radio or television in your own language is not a privilege. And it should be something that public funds must be. I was telling somebody that the analogy is like this. You have your child in private school, but you do not contest that public funds be used to fund public schools. Precisely because your children, even though they are in private schools and you can pay for it, are going to live with those who are coming from the public schools to all share in the same common. So fundamentally, whereas public service broadcasters have civic identity building as their mandate, the private media systems are into consumer culture building. Whereas the public service broadcaster has a primary mandate to focus on letting people understand their sense of belonging. So that's why sometimes they say our content is boring. It's boring precisely because we are into the business of, not into business consumer culture growing. And we cannot run away from it. Now, so that is why there's always a justification globally to fund, and I'll give you an example, Mr. Chairman. The European Media Freedom Act, which has recently passed, has given August 2025 deadline for all European countries to ensure that their public service broadcasting units have editorial autonomy and stable funding. And it is to come into force in August 2025 this year. They have passed that act to make it mandatory across all European Union member states. There is no any decline. There is a serious interest, even in the era of multiplicity. And at the same time, way back in 2007, the same European Union agreed that in view of new media, public service broadcasting systems should open up their mandate to include digital platforms. That is why the language is public service media, no more public service broadcasting. So that the literature today is not talking about public service broadcasting, but as public service media to include online, digital platforms. The bottom line is not the reach, it's the focus of the content. Whereas public service broadcasters have a mandate to build on civic consciousness and identities, private media is more interested in consumer culture development for good reasons. And nobody can begrudge them for that. That is how they make their money, and that is how they have to survive, and that is how they fund themselves. So, like the so-called global backlash on public service broadcasting is something that is passing. I will draw your attention. Even Margaret Thatcher won election to shut down the BBC. Every politician of the other side, when they come, they are on the onslaught, but they soon realize that they can't do it. The only country in Europe that has ever made the mistake of shutting down their public service broadcasting was Greece. They shut down their public service broadcasting on the 11th of June 2013. And on the 11th of June. And I'll tell you the beauty of when you collapse a state broadcaster like GBC and you are in government, you are going to feast on the assets of GBC, like what happened to Ghana Airways. So if I'm a politician, I'm in government, I'll pray for the collapse of GBC so that we'll take a decision on the assets of GBC. So there's always an attraction. The Greece went through that. And just before they were able to liquidate the assets after a dissolution of the public service broadcaster, it was brought back to life. So I'm saying that apart from that Greek experiment, which went disastrous for them, no sensible democracy that we know has said they are going to downplay because there's now private media. They are going to focus on that and let the state media or the public service media go down. Rather, it's a Canadian model, which they are now regretting that it's not a good model because Canadians don't pay TV license, but they get all their funding from the state, from the public resource. And there are arguments about justifying it. So there's a question about what percentage of our, a few years back, it was something like 20% IGF, 80%, but in recent times, we have managed to come to 1/3 IGF, 2/3 GOG. And I can tell you this, if government was to pay for what the Constitution have asked us to do, if they were to cost it and add it to it, we would have gone more than 50% IGF and less than 50% for GOG. But we carry these obligations and we are not funded. We are not refunded. When, as a CEO, I fear election petitions. The last election petition, GBC had to spend $5 a minute to a satellite provider to give us live coverage to the studios. In the years past, there was a line of sight between the court and GBC. But in recent times, we have had some high-rise buildings, which has made radio link impossible. So with that development, you must use satellite link. And the only satellite link we could get at that time was a service provider who gave us $5 a minute. So for every minute of the court sitting, we were paying $5 from our IGF. We wrote to government, we wrote to the Ministry of Finance. I even convinced the Chief Justice to write to the Ministry of Finance, all to naught. Nothing came out of it. We've had to fund it from IGF. So anytime the court was sitting, we're praying that they should end the sitting very soon, just for that court process. So free airtime. And recently they asked national coverage. So when they go to the regions, I ordered my regional directors to deny service to Parliament because they were not ready to pay. Yes. And they called me to Parliament. I told them, I can't change my mind because you don't have